Good morning again, everyone, and welcome to the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I am Barb Champ, Vice President of the Friends of the Institute. Today's lecture is part of a series sponsored by Friends of the Institute and made possible through the generous support of the Mark and Mary Goff Fiterman Fund. We are so pleased to have Rose B Simpson as our speaker today. I have a few announcements to make before Rose is introduced. I'll ask you to refer to the slide on the screen. On January 11th, Friends Only presents Decorative Arts with speaker Kara Zambalin. And on January 21st, the book club, and the book title is Virgil Wander by Leaf Anger. We hope you can attend those events. On January 20th, we have our big day. It is our 100th birthday, and the Centennial Committee has planned a special celebration. The Friends lecture is at 11 a.m. and will be given by Dr. Eike Schmidt, director of the Uffizi Galleries in Florence, Italy. He will transport us to the Uffizi Galleries, housed in a building designed by Giorgio Vasari in the 14th century and containing priceless Italian Renaissance paintings. The lecture will be followed by a beautiful luncheon that includes violin music, flowers, and special guests. Please join us for both events. So how do you join us? Tickets will be available tomorrow, December 10th. Details and ticketing links can be found at our website, which is seen at the bottom of the slide, friends-artsmedia.org. And then please take a drive by Mia on the 24th Street to see the Chinese lions that have been decorated beautifully to celebrate the season. Finally, I invite everyone to become a Friends member or renew their membership in 2022. It's easy to do when you secure your tickets to the January lecture. And please note that all Friends members in good standing will receive a beautiful commemorative centennial book in 2022. And just a little housekeeping, please use the Q&A for questions and comments as we hear Rose's chat today. Let me introduce you to Jill Alberg-Yo. I had the pleasure of working with Jill for Art in Bloom 2021, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce her today. Jill is Mia's Associate Curator of Native American Art. In 2008, she received her PhD from the University of New Mexico. Her dissertation focused on the social life of weaving in contemporary Navajo life. She came to Mia in 2014 from the St. Louis Art Museum. Among her goals at Mia is to expand public understanding of Native art. In 2019, she and Terry Greaves co-curated Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists. That exhibition highlighted over 1,000 years of art made by Native American women. Please welcome Jill Alberg-Yo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barb, and thanks to the Friends for this amazing morning with Rose B. Simpson. It's an honor to introduce Rose to all of you, and I wanted to have a special thanks to Jean Ann Doradas, who is a part of the Friends, who was very persistent and understood the importance of bringing Rose to Mia and to all of you today. So thank you, Jean Ann. I also want to acknowledge that we are on Dakota territory, as well as neighboring Anishinaabe and Ho-Chunk neighbors territory. You may remember, if you saw Hearts of Our People, that Rose created one of the most beloved and signature works of art for the exhibition, titled Maria. The fully restored, beautiful artwork was a black on black Chevy El Camino. So now I'll introduce our guest today. Rose B. Simpson has a BFA from the Institute of American Indian Art, an MFA from Rhode Island School of Design, and an MA in Creative Writing from the Institute of American Indian Arts. She has had recent solo exhibitions at the Wheelwright Museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the Nevada Art Museum, Savannah College of Art and Design Art Museum, and Pomona College Museum of Art. In just this past year, Rose's work has been included in numerous group exhibitions, including Mass MoCA, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the UC Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, as well as the Bronx Museums of Art. Simpson has forthcoming solo exhibitions at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia, PA, the ICA Boston, and Jessica Silverman Gallery in San Francisco. Rose's sculptures are in many museum collections, including the collections at the Denver Art Museum, ICA Boston, Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Pomona College Museum of Art, Portland Art Museum, Princeton University Art Museum, and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Simpson lives and works at the Santa Clara Pueblo in New Mexico. She is represented by Jessica Silverman in San Francisco and recently by Jack Shainman Gallery in New York. So welcome, Rose.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, MIA Mia, for having me. Thank you, Jean Ann, for pulling me in. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm in the morning, so maybe some of you are in the morning, some of you are in the afternoon, but hope you're having a beautiful day. So like Jill said, my name is Rose B Simpson, and I put the date on this talk because things change so much these days, and right now these are my thoughts of December 2021, and this is where I am in my work and in my mind and in my life thoughts. So welcome to this journey. I took a walk a few days ago. It's really, really warm here in New Mexico. It's too warm. It should be snowing and cold, but it's been in the 60s in the day. But I walked up to this place that I call heaven. I live here in Santa Clara Pueblo, right below these mesas in this pinon and juniper high desert area where my ancestors have lived for thousands of years. And I choose to stay here. This is my medicine. This is the center of the world for me. And this is important. This morning was my mom's birthday. Today is my mom's birthday. And we went to breakfast before I came here, and we talked about grandparents and how we are who we are in so many ways, to carry some sort of karmic load of our grandparents. And I recently lost my grandfather, Grandpa Tom, my dad's dad. And last year he passed. He was a philosopher, a lecturer at St. John's College, and he was best friends with my other grandpa, my mom's dad. My parents met because all my grandparents were besties. And my grandpa Tom and my grandma Rena Swensel, who was from Santa Clara, used to sit at the dinner table for hours and hours and argue. They would talk and talk and talk, and they were trying to bridge some sort of cultural gap between them. And I often think that I am the manifestation of this cultural gap. My grandpa Tom, this is a quote, I'll read it for you guys. He wrote books on Maxwell's theory in the electromagnetic field. Much of my work has its roots in a long study of the writings of James Clerk Maxwell in the electromagnetic field. The concept of the field has been for me, as I believe it was for Maxwell, a window into the wholeness of the natural world. From this vision of nature stems, in turn, a fresh sense of the unity of society and indeed of ourselves. I have tried to trace this thread of wholeness through its many ramifications in education, in literature, in the arts, in philosophy, and in our very conception of science itself. Through it all, the image of the field has been my guide. That was my grandpa Tom. My grandma, Dr. Rena Swensel, one of the first people from Santa Clara Pueblo to get her PhD. She wrote and spoke at length about Pueblo theory and philosophy, and a lot of her writings are available online and in books, etc. Being religiously egocentric, Pueblo people do live at the center. I think that's at the center of the universe. Their world is sacramental. It is a world thoroughly impregnated with the energy, purpose, and sense of the creative natural forces. It is all one. Sacredness, then, is recognizable in everyday life. The purpose of life for Pueblo people is to be intimately united with nature, intimately connected with everything in the natural world. Everything is included in that connectedness. So you can imagine their conversations where my grandpa is trying, I remember listening to them late into the night, playing with my cousins, and my grandpa trying to understand the sort of spiritual and ceremonial perspective that my grandma was offering him, and him trying so bad, he tried so bad to fit it into his scientific and philosophical mind. And he worked hard at it. When I was a little kid, he would try and corner me and my cousins to explain to us the fourth dimension. And it was very frustrating because you wanted to go run around with your cousins and scream and did not want to talk about the fourth dimension. But I wonder sometimes how much I am their conversation continued. If they didn't figure it out, maybe in this life we can. So I want to talk about why I do what I do and why every single day I wake up with a deep, deep held intention to make significant change and to find the patterns of our experience as human beings on this planet so that we can make better decisions. And what it comes down to is I am witness and I am privy to a lot of atrocities and drama and trauma that is ancestral, that is ongoing, that is into the future. It seems as hopelessness, a deep heartbreak. And so I'm constantly trying to understand this rift and what happened to it. And because of my family and their philosophical perspectives on both sides, I've been able to look at the world through this understanding of patterns, or trying to. Photo on the left is of Aztec Ruins National Monument. This is of a line of blue stones that was hidden underneath the clay plaster initially. And this to me is about intention that is embedded into our work, our life, that sometimes we don't see. On the right is a poster actually made for Chaco Astrological Festival, Astronomy Festival, that talks about that interdimensionality and the understanding of pattern. This is a pot from West Central New Mexico, ancestral. And in it, I see the very thing that I showed you in the beginning, of the grass blowing in the wind, of the clouds over the mesas, of the full multi-dimensional aspect of our existence on this planet. My mother, happy birthday, Roxanne, grew up not being able to speak. She had a speech impediment. And because my grandma had clay, she turned to the clay to express herself. And because I grew up watching my mother build her contemporary vessels to express herself, that is a foundational privilege that I've had of building with clay that came through my maternal ancestral line. And I often forget that my relationship to clay is a genetic memory, and that came from her. And when you watch someone build with their hands, clay vessels, clay people, the homes that we live in and grow our food, that's a neural pathway and a body understanding that is a privilege that allows me to continue that conversation into this lifetime in the ways that I do. And a lot of my work has been about trying to understand this multifaceted perspective that I've been given, and how to use this language, and what are my values, and how do I take the conversation over the table between my grandparents and make it work, and make it a language that I'm able to master, a language that is beyond culture. And I think that's one of the things, is watching this gap between my grandparents, where they wanted so badly. My grandma wanted my grandpa to get it. And my grandpa wanted to get it so bad. He ached to understand what Rena saw. He wanted so badly to see her perspective. And I don't think he ever fully got there. And I think that I am that continued. And so often my work revolves around getting close to culture and then further away from it, in order to make it a language that can cross barriers. I made this piece. It's called To Be Pueblo. It's the piece on the right. It's actually clay tile, low relief clay tile of a photograph of a Santa Clara person around the turn of the last century. I've worked in my studies. I deconstructed my ceramic process to the bare minimum, trying to find what was that yearning. What was the feeling across that dinner table? Where do we all find that yearn? Where does that go? That we all have this deep, deep intentionality. And what is that intentionality, and where can we honor that, acknowledge it, and reincorporate it into our lived experience in a world that has prioritized denial over true investigation and questioning. I've learned to use clay and honor its sort of natural states. And my work has been about editing and sort of sweeping off a lot of that petty and superficial aspects of our creative processes and our aesthetic, to find some sort of core, the core bones of the feeling itself. I've developed this style called slab, where I throw the clay very thin, and it forces me to work quickly and in a very, very conscious collaboration with the clay, so that I can actually use it. So it doesn't dry too fast. It has to dry this very specific amount before I can build more on it. So this type of building itself is a meditative process that I have found. And then also finding materials and sourcing things in our world that we live in now, whether it's rusty metal pieces or car parts, or pieces of leather, or broken clay beads that can be put back together. And I feel like this is a representation of the innovation, the psychological innovation, the spiritual innovation that I think we need to survive, where we honor our innate being, that which is very raw, which shows the process of our being, rather than trying to pretend we're something else. And how do we portray that process in a really beautiful way, so that we can start loving ourselves for who we are, and not for an exotified or objectified or stereotyped idea of what that means to be a human being with a very cultural experience. So the piece on the left is called Reincarnation. That's a newer piece. And the piece on the right is called Growing Pains. And it's about that growth and that stretch. It's about that genetic memory. It's about how genetic memory comes through our visceral senses of taste and smell. And how do we create an aesthetic that is truly our own, so that self-love can come through without any kind of checkbox or tick mark or socially acceptable and historically disruptive idea of self and identity. And part of it is work, is those tiny steps that we take and the investment into it, that care, that one foot in front of the next, and how we show that process. And that becomes the process, becomes the threshold to a new experience. This piece is covered with thousands of small pieces of wood. I then covered that wood with a body filler, and then I sanded it down to like 1,000 grits. So it's very, 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 very smooth. This piece is about our empowerment and what that looks like, and how in being rooted and very deeply rooted in self and experience and consciousness and place and time, that we can be incredibly directed. So oftentimes I use a star, which is what you see there on the chest, and also cut in the metal there in the waist, and also an X. So the star equals to me direction, and the X equals to me protection. And we're constantly in that mode of courage and also care. In the past few years, I've gone through a phase, which I don't think I'm over yet, where I'm making twins. I'm making duplicates, where I'm making a set of two pieces that are in conversation, in relationship with each other. And this started with a piece I made, a large installation I did at Site Santa Fe, where I made these 9-foot tall figures that were in a 60-foot room facing each other, and the energy between them was visceral. And so I started working with the space between the two pieces, whether it's physical or conceptual, the space between them is activated. And it's about relationship with self, relationship with, as in this one, with responsibility and accountability. It's a relationship with other, and how we begin to reflect that. And also learn from it, that in the moment of awareness, we are in true communication, and that can also be silence. The piece on the left is called Syncing, S-Y-N-C, sync, like being in sync. And then the piece on the right are Sister Selves. And that one has a little to do with identity and softening, and finding an expression of beauty in relationship. These are the river girls I made. And these works are not just about an independent idea of identity or self-development, but also the fact that our identity and our work, our deep invested work in self-awareness and ancestral and futuristic accountability comes through in our work, and it becomes, this creative process. These figurative sculptures are work, but they're also doing work. They're utilitarian. When I was making these pieces for a solo show I had at Jessica Silverman Gallery, a little girl from our Pueblo went missing, and they found her body in this river in the Rio Grande, which is there by my studio. And it broke me. It broke me very deeply. We have an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and it has affected me personally more than once in my life very deeply. And I wanted to create a prayer of change in this river that has ancestral memory of colonization, of patriarchal domination, of thousands of bodies have been thrown into this river and their souls floated down to the ocean. And how could I put that prayer back into that water to send out into the universe some sort of strengthening process? We're going to get through this, and we're going to stand strong, and we're going to make a very deep and lasting change. And some of that is self-knowledge and self-awareness. And I find some of the most delicious points of self-awareness are in aesthetic, in an aesthetic relationship with material and matter, that we are all, everything is matter. And our love of this matter and our conscious relationship to that we are in a collaboration of being, that relationship to that matter is changing our world right now. The consciousness of it is making what we see every day. And when we become more and more, have more agency in what that looks like and how that's reflected, we find our strength and also our beauty. This is the second reincarnation, and it was really, I think this was one of those moments where I had the most delicious time building this aesthetic, finding beads and parts and lava, rock, and old beads from my studio and stone. And some of those beads are beads that washed up onto the beach. I love those where there's like an ancestral relationship to that aesthetic and there's time and history in it. And you can see it and feel it. It doesn't feel like plastic, let me tell you. And this piece on the left, I actually made because I was hanging on to these beads. And I love these beads. I couldn't, there was something delicious about them. They had consciousness, they had energy, and how could I give them a moment of glory or this moment of love? How do I love them? And so, I made a piece about those and how we begin to, notice that aesthetic. And it is about a very deep consciousness and a deep awareness and a deep choosing of what things are. And then building a collaboration into that aesthetic that, is doing work, is building consciousness, is reflecting back to you a part of yourself that may be needing to move more, a muscle, a human muscle that we've all atrophied, that we need to start working out again. And my work are vessels, they're pots. They have they are doing that work of reminding us of the consciousness in all things, that these pots, these 4 pots are actually not mine. I walked over to my mom's one day and she was sitting in the ground sanding these outside of her studio. And there was something so beautiful. They were breathing. I could feel them breathing and coming to life, and she was giving them life with her intention. And it reminded me of this open mouth on this piece on the left. So much of my work is about inhabiting a way of being and about reflecting that beingness that I'm trying to find for myself. And as I'm looking for that within myself in my life, I'm hoping to share that experience with others. So when I was at the Rhode Island School of Design, I studied deeply performance art. I was very interested in it, and it actually led me to Nicholas Boryard's relational aesthetics. And I studied with Yuriko Saito, wrote a book called Aesthetics of the Everyday, based on Japanese aesthetic. And I was really caught, as the closest thing I could find to what I thought was the aesthetic of indigeneity that I was familiar with. And so after graduate school, I came back to Santa Clara, to Española, which is the lowrider capital of the world. And I started working on cars because I was really caught with everyday aesthetics and relational aesthetics, where utilitarian things become aesthetic experiences. And I had grown up witnessing the lowrider culture. And I realized that was this very beautiful and ultimate reflection of everyday aesthetics, where you are adorning yourself to do something mundane and making an experience that could be fraught with mundanity and make it into something incredibly full of life and rich with experience. So I went to school for auto body at Northern New Mexico College, basically their lowrider program. And I got this 1985 Chevy El Camino. For the drivetrain, I was gonna put in something else. That's my truck back there too. And one day we were harvesting in the field, and we have the small kids, and my mom said, let's take that ugly thing and take it to harvest because the bed was so low. And this was the aha moment where I realized this was a vessel. And so I decided to paint it like a vessel and actually finish this car for a residency I was doing at the Denver Art Museum at the time. This photo is here just to show that I enlisted all my girlfriends, all my bros. There's a lot of hands and deconstructing gender stereotypes as we go along. So the car was painted satin black, which is a hot rod black, and then I taped a negative, and then I threw a gloss clear on top of the hot rod black. And my teacher told me I couldn't do it. He said, if it doesn't work, you're gonna have to sand it off. And so I said, all right, I'll sand it if it doesn't work. And then it worked. And many of you saw her, which is pretty cool. And of course, she is always changing. And so the El Camino that you saw had different rims. It had a cowl induction hood because it's a living thing and it has experiences. And I put it was actually a vacuum booster in the engine, thinking it would help with the brake problem, and it actually just the fan sheared off the hood and sheared off the front end of the engine and went through the hood. And so the hood that's on Maria now is a new hood because she needed a new hood from this iconic photo that was taken by Kate Russell. And the car was initially made for here's a nice photo that's the new iteration of the El Camino that was taken at the Philbrook. And so you can see the cowl induction hood and the different rims. So you can see, she's also a living thing in evolution, and she's never done because we are still in relationship. But the car was actually finished to do a performance piece at the Denver Art Museum. And what I did was I made objects of adornment for a group of genderqueer buddies, basically, who we all got together and we walked with the car. We took up space. We closed down streets in Denver. And I put a heartbeat through the sound system of the El Camino, and I drove and we marched through the space. And it was about deconstructing gender roles. It was about the post-apocalyptic experience of the indigenous peoples. It was about empowerment. It was about bringing awareness to the intensity of our modern experience. But what happened was I realized that as a performer, as a participant in this experience, I was actually being transformed through the courage of being in this position. And so I realized that this was a transformance. And last month, I was able to go to Las Vegas, Nevada, in collaboration with the Nevada Museum of Art to do it was intended to be a performance through the Art and Environment Conference season. And I worked in collaboration with Fawn Douglas, who is Southern Paiute New from that area and has a art space there. And we went and we worked and we co-created an experience that I'm still sort of digesting. And we made these objects of adornment that felt appropriate, and we made our beads and put our intention and prayer into those beads, and I sewed the shoes, and then we marched. We did this taking up space that was slow and meditative, and the anti-spectacle of a place that very much represented so many things that I feel represents the damage of our human psyche in this time. I took a car out as basically one tool that we could use for this as we co-created this experience, and we ended up not needing it. And I saw that as a representation of my growth and my self-worth and my power, that I didn't need to feel empowered, that I could hold that in a silence. And I attribute a lot of it to becoming a mother. I'll be talking, I'll just go back to that one more time. I'll be, Fawn and I, and also a filmmaker, will be showing a film of this experience, and also be in conversation on February 17th of 2021. Information about that will be given out through the Nevada Museum of Art, but I welcome you all to join. So some of my recent projects I just want to reflect on. I've been going big and I've been going big in a time where, my daughter was home from school all the time, and I've been pushing my own limits of what's possible, and I've been surprising myself, and I've been finding myself in reflection of courage and strength in ways that are exciting and also exhausting, and I'm learning a lot from these experiences. This is a photo of me in my studio while I was making the installation that is now at the Nevada Museum of Art. This piece is called The Four. There are 4 monumental figures emerging from the ground, and on their heads are pots that have earth, or in this case, stones from the area. So the museum staff went outside and collected rocks from outside the museum and put it in the pots that are in their heads. There's also a pot in the center of the room. And on the wall are 100 photos of earth from my own experience in going into the ceremonious and sort of being conscious of the sanctity of space and place and ancestral homeland. So those are all photos of places of my walks through my ancestral homelands, and these beings are rising up and bringing to consciousness the sacredness of something that we have deeply disrespected in so many ways. Yeah. Another group of works that I recently completed, this was all during COVID lockdown, so this is all very challenging processes. These are 8-foot tall figures that are leaning against glass, and I made these very specific for these they call them the jewel cases on the outside of the Savannah College of Art and Design's museum, and that their foreheads would lean against the center pane of glass, and they have 2 points for feet. So there's a very tenuous lean that speaks to vulnerability, that speaks to fragility, and that speaks to sort of waiting for a threshold. This piece is called Countdown, and there's 4 of them originally made for this. There was four cases along the street. There were 4 simple images that were cut into steel and placed on the wall, and then vinyl pieces also placed on the glass, so that in a sense there's timing and a waiting for that moment where synchronicity will happen, with shadow, with space and movement and time. Also, the windows were tinted in to represent the star of direction. I really felt strongly about this work. One, it was a lot of work to build, but also I felt like I was going through an investigation in my own sort of fragility and vulnerability as I made these. There now, 3 of them are installed at Mass MoCA, and they are leaning against a post in the room, and they're sort of putting their heads together. witnessing them in person and being able to, the difference between standing on the street and looking in at them and seeing your reflection in the glass, but being separate from, but then also being able to walk up to and almost hear them talking to each other and sharing secrets in this space. And really, in a sense, putting their heads together to make, to really talk about our own fragility and interdependence in this time. They also printed a life-size photo of the iconic photo that Kate Russell took of Maria there on the wall in the space, it gives it a really cool dimensionality and context that I find really cool. If you're in New York, check it out. And this is a project I'm currently working on. I'm not anymore holding a chainsaw 8 hours a day, but we're going to be installing 12 9-foot figures at Plymouth Plantations, which is across from Plymouth Rock. These will be cast in concrete with ceramic elements. And I made them all. I made the originals out of wood, and I carved them with a chainsaw, which you can see on the left. And that is the seal that we put on that color. And I was signing them with the chainsaw. But I'm really excited about this project. The eyes are actually see-through, so there will be light coming through. And it is about sort of our self-awareness and consciousness around colonization and the choices that we make in our current, world, and the history that we need to be aware of and conscious of, but also, that sometimes we need to stop and realize that the things that we might call inanimate might be watching. The question I ask myself the most is, to what end? Especially when I'm stressed out. And I'm wondering, why am I doing this? Why do I do this? Why do I return to the studio? Why do I agree to work? Why do I put myself out there? Why do I rip my chest open and make this work and watch it stare at me and feel those hard things? Becoming a parent mother has been one of the most life-changing things. And for the first time in my life, I really believe in a future. I believe deeply in a future that is beyond anything we could imagine. And I think we are in this threshold, we are in this transitional moment where we can't keep going how we have been, and that we have to be brave, and we have to be strong, and we have to stand tall for our children. And whether that is actually these physical beings that we're creating that will live into the future and have a relationship with this environment, our natural world, and each other, but also ourselves, that we're conscious of ourselves and we hold those vulnerable parts of ourselves as we walk into the war that's ahead of us. And that war might be spiritual, it might be incredibly deconstructivist, but I am so deeply believing that this battle we're heading into is going to really, really clarify what hasn't been healthy or for our benefit, and bring to the surface some of the most beautiful things we could possibly imagine, because we can't keep going like this. The piece on the left is called Genesis, and it was the first piece I made when I became a mom. And then the piece on the right is called Cairn, and it's about that, responsibility of being, a leader, of showing the path, of becoming that path, of holding balance of our ancestral trauma and gift, and how do we create a new future for our young ones. And in Karen, the little child on the shoulders has their eyes closed. There's a lot of trust and faith. I made this piece long before I could ever have known I was a mother. I was actually told when I was 18 I could never have kids. And so I often thought about our relationship to ourselves. And in the end, I got to experience what it meant to be a nurturer, a true nurturer. And it's changed how I look at all things, from our humanity, our collective humanity, to our spiritual and psychological conditions, and how we can be tender with ourselves and each other, and how we can, that tenderness and the courage to be tender, and the courage to be silent, and the courage to be brave in that silence beyond the moment where we get discomfort, that we can find that true health in the space that really, really feels like right place, and a healthy relationship to self in the world, so that we can create something unlike we've ever known. Thank you. You have questions?
Wow, thank you so much. That was quite a journey. We have a few questions. Well, we have a comment and a questions. This is more of a pragmatic one. How do you learn to see a plus as a star, not a cross or a plus sign?
I think it's cultural.
Yeah.
That's absolutely cultural. So, I think often about, there are many people in my community who are raised Catholic or with relationship to Christianity. My mom chose not to raise my brother and I in that religious belief system, but strictly in our ancestral beliefs. And so I don't see like a Christian cross in things, and so it's like a visual language that we're taught to see or not see. And I don't mind if it's a plus, like a mathematics sign, because it's also, positive. It's also an additive. It's the direction that goes forth. And so I think when I look at patterns, there's so many metaphors in every single thing that we can look at. If you look at it long enough, it starts talking to you. And oftentimes I think in this world, we're so used to being fed information, and a very specific bottled type of information, that we are not taught to think for ourselves and to decipher in ways or build muscles of comprehension that are beyond Western education. And so I think artists as weirdos are oftentimes beings who can see that metaphor and translate that metaphor. And I think a lot of roles of like artists, and even spaces that make space for artists, like museums and curators, are vital in educating not our minds, but a different part of our awareness in how to comprehend the world around us. So about building a muscle that I think Western capitalist patriarchal society has seen as a threat. If it's not packaged and it's marketable, how do we really get to it? So I feel like, art and the expression of it, especially in Western culture, is vital. And I think, think about going to a museum of like, I gotta go work out, this muscle of my alternative consciousness is starting to get really atrophied, it needs to start to get weak. I'm not seeing the magic. I'm not seeing the beauty. I'm not seeing the multidimensionality in every day of my life. So I better go look at some art, or read a really amazing book, or, listen to some really exceptional music, and build my capacity to feel the magic and the multidimensional layers of our reality that art can offer.
Yeah, I think you raised such an important point throughout your talk, the idea of consciousness in all things, and something that your mother and your grandmother instilled in you. And I think about that as you talk about museums, um, about the animacy of things that is hard for a lot of people to understand, but for a lot of Native people, it's something that's absolutely true. And have you thought about ways in which museums or curators or educators can convey that way of seeing what we call things as living, as subjects themselves?
I often think that one of the main problems to our, or the main, things that have caused that dissociative relationship to the world, or that very individual thinking, or I mean, I even think about my grandpa, who was a mathematician and a scientist, and he wanted so badly to figure it out through science
Mhm.
and math that he had gone to, I can mathematically explain the fourth dimension. He wrote books about it. If you want to go that direction, knock yourself out. I was like, why are you doing that? Just close your eyes. Um, and you can access the fourth dimension, or leave them open and blur them and listen with the muscles between your shoulder blades. And there's your answer. But I think one of the main problems with Western cultures is the need to objectify, because if we can objectify, then things are controllable, they're easily organized and easily digested, right? There's somewhere to put that in my head. And if I have a nice place to put that, then I don't have to be scared. I don't have to be confused. And I don't have to stand in a space of suspended disbelief, because I think that space of suspended disbelief can be terrifying. But it's in that space of suspended disbelief where magic happens, and where we can start noticing that there's more to this world that's absolutely beautiful than we could ever imagine. And I think, art is such a wonderful access point to that, because it has been daring in times of deep control. Art has pushed boundaries and made people uncomfortable. And in that discomfort, people have grown and expanded and learned, right? But then so many people need to objectify that. We need to objectify Indians. They need to look this way, check those boxes, look, think these things, and they belong in one corner of the museum. And just like science, it's like natural history museums. We need to perpetuate the boxes. So I think that, museums and curators and people who are in charge of sharing that art, or have positions of power with that, how do we begin to notice that need for objectification and stereotyping, and the safety of exotification? If it's other, then I don't need to find it in myself, and I don't need to feel scared and lost and lonely, and I don't ever need to know, like, maybe I don't know, and maybe it's in that not knowing where I actually find my deepest power. And in those spaces, we can see our internalized racism and all of the things that have kept, power positions perpetuated. And we can begin to deconstruct those when we get deeply self-aware and humble and look at our fears.
I wanted to ask you something else. Your relationship with your works, once they leave you for a period of time or not, or I mean, that's one way of thinking about it. But your own, what I'm just so curious. What's your relationship as you make the work, and then when you know that it's going to be showcased somewhere? What are your feelings about that, and your evolutionary, your growing relationship with those works?
Recently, I've built it, I've been aware that they don't come back. You know, and there's this thing, I say bye and I say, you know, I love you, and do good work out there, you know. And it's sad, you know, like my daughter will sometimes go give them hugs and cry when they leave. But I also, I think it's an exercise in faith. It's an exercise in deep faith that I, you know, I put my forehead to their forehead and I say, you know, you used me to make yourself. I brought you into being, not because I had any control over it, but because something else created you. And I'm only the hammer and nails. I'm only the tool to bring this forth. And I have faith that you are here to do what you need to do in the world. And I have deep faith, and that is a good thing. And in that, no matter where you go, no matter what you see, no matter what happens to you, that you're doing the thing that you were meant to do. And it's a good practice to do that with my art. Because we could start with our objectified things, like this is a cup and it was supposed to, you know what I mean? And deconstruct, like, I don't know your journey, and I don't know what you were meant to do. And who am I to know what this cup was intended to do in the world? And my job is to witness instead of control. And I think that when you do that with your pieces, you can start to do that with other people and the world around you. Like, I may not know what is right. All I can do is feel deeply what feels right for myself and make those very informed decisions in my life, and try not to judge what happens beyond me. And hope that if I can be the most self-aware and accountable I can be, that ripples out into the world like the water that drops in the pool.
Just a couple of things to close. Rose, I like your work, but I love your words. So inspiring and articulate. You're powerful. What a phenomenal talk. It is life-changing. Thank you. Just last question. Can you say a little more about the open eyes in your pots and sculptures?
I think often, you know, I have to be careful with that because they have open eyes, which means there's something inside, and they are vessels, right? Just like my cup here is a vessel that holds something. Right now my coffee's in there, right? But when you make an empty space, even when you open your hands up, there's space in there. Something fills that space. And the air has energy and it has intention. Everything has intention in it, right? So when you make a space and you go like this and you make a space, especially if it's a clay vessel, it fills with something. And that something is watching, right? And so when I was a knucklehead teenager, I used to go spray paint on things that weren't mine. I'm not ashamed of it, but it is what happened. And the one thing that I wanted to paint on things was eyes watching. I wanted people to always know they were being watched. And there was this deep need to make these watching eyes and to give witness. I wanted people to be self-aware, because when we think we're alone, we think we can do whatever the hell we want to, right? And we don't see ourselves accountably. But when we have something watching us, it changes the way we act. When we're like, because in a sense, when do we become the eyes on ourselves? When do we become the watching of ourselves? Not in judgment, but in a deep awareness. Because it's not about judging it. It's about just watching. And this deep, deep watching. If you start watching, you might see something. And sometimes I think we're really scared of what we might see if we look deeply. And that's what my work is doing.
Well, with that, I want to thank you so much for this. I agree. You are kind of having this conversation with your grandparents, and I can see just about the synchronicity and the that all matter. When you talk about matter, I can see your grandfather talking about matter, but I can also see your grandmother talking about matter and its relationship. So I think that that was your self-awareness of understanding where these ideas aren't necessarily arriving from you, but from a lineage. Um, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Be well, everyone. Be well.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks, Rose.
Yeah.